The emissions cap is back at the top of our docket today. However, this time, the war isn't focused between Alberta Premier Danielle Smith and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, but between Trudeau and former Liberal Finance Minister Bill Morneau. Morneau called on Canada to reconsider core Liberal policies like the oil and gas emissions cap in light of US President-elect Donald Trump's recent re-election. On the show today, we'll also be discussing former Prime Minister Stephen Harper's possible return to the arena as chair of the Alberta Investment Management Corp, the province potentially adding citizenship status to driver's licenses, national rent decreases, and more. I'm Isaac Lamoureux, your host of the Alberta Roundup, and let's get into that first story now. Former Liberal Finance Minister Bill Morneau was interviewed on CTV's Question Period, where he highlighted that Canada's approach needs to shift to align with new American priorities following Trump's re-election, and should focus on defense spending, technology, and energy security. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith shared the post of Morneau to X. She said, quote, "Even PM Justin Trudeau's former Liberal finance minister knows how bad a production cap is for Canada and our economy." Smith, who previously called the oil and gas cap a, quote, "deranged vendetta against Alberta," also gave a special thanks to Rona Ambrose for sticking up for the province. Former interim Conservative leader Rona Ambrose spoke on the show and referenced that the Liberals have an upcoming economic update at the end of November. She said, quote, "I would recommend that if they've written it, they rewrite it, and they look at it, and make sure that it outlines the domestic economic policies that will make us competitive." Morneau said that Canada should consider how it aligns with its southern allies' technology sector, and questioned whether a digital services tax on technology is the right way forward. The Business Council of Canada warned that retaliatory measures from the United States would hurt Canadian businesses, the economy, and families in general. The tax would also impact Canada's relationship with the US when the Canada-United States-Mexico agreement comes up for review in 2026. Morneau said that Canada needs to think about how it will hit defense spending more rapidly than the Liberals have planned. The Parliamentary Budget Officer warned that Canada must double its defense spending to meet its NATO commitment by 2032. Smith was not the only one to comment on what Morneau had to say. Alberta Environment Minister Rebecca Schultz shared the clip, asking him to give her federal counterpart Stephen Guilbeault a phone call and talk some sense into him. Hopping into our next story here, former Prime Minister Stephen Harper has been rumored as the potential new chair of the Alberta Investment Management Corporation. According to Post Media, sources close to the government say that Premier Smith has wanted Harper to take on the role for some time. However, he apparently needs to take care of some ongoing business activities. These activities don't signal any wrongdoing or anything of the sort, but they could be potential conflicts. AIMCo is one of the top 10 largest pension funds in Canada and is responsible for managing over $160 billion in assets, with a 7.3% 10-year annualized rate of return. The pension saw a $8.9 billion investment net return in 2023. Some of the managed assets include the Alberta Teachers Retirement Fund, the local authorities' pension plan, and the Public Service Pension Plan. The pension fund operates independently from the province. It has recently come under new leadership as Alberta Finance Minister Nate Horner announced last week that he would become the sole director and chair until a new chair is appointed within 30 days after sacking the CEO and the entire board. He cited that between 2019 and 2023, AIMCo's third-party management fees have increased 96%, the number of employees by 29%, while salary, wage, and benefit costs have increased 71%. These increases apparently came despite the corporation managing a smaller percentage of funds internally. Ray Gilmore, a senior public servant in the provincial government for over 5 years, has been named interim CEO. Over the past 5 years, Gilmore oversaw an organization with more than 29,000 employees and a $73 billion budget. Horner said, quote, "Ray has been the most trusted official in the province under 3 premiers. I have complete confidence in his ability to get costs at AIMCo under control and restore stability to the corporation." I reached out to the finance minister for confirmation on whether Harper would become the chair, and he told me, quote, "Alberta's government will be announcing the new chair of AIMCo within the next couple weeks." So keep your eyes out on that and let me know whether you trust Harper with managing this fund or whether you'd rather see Harper return in some other way. Now hopping into some interesting news, which is that the Alberta government may be adding citizenship status to provincial driver licenses. Alberta's Minister of Service and Red Tape Reduction, Dale Nally, spoke briefly about this at the UCP's AGM. He said, quote, "One of the things that we're looking at is how we can put citizenship on the driver's license so that when people come to vote, we can make sure they are a Canadian citizen." We know that Smith has been steadfast in protecting election integrity and has promised to ban the use of vote tabulators at both the municipal and provincial levels. And look, we've also seen how useless these tabulators are in the recent BC election, which took weeks to tally. And it seems that these tabulators only ever make election result counting take longer and certainly do nothing to protect the integrity of elections given some of the controversies we've seen about these tabulators in the past. Documents acquired from the Canadian Security Intelligence Service by Postmedia previously showed that Alberta's resources, economy, and strong ethnic communities made it a, quote, very attractive target for foreign interference. The notes said that the foreign interference was not limited to the federal level and could occur provincially and even municipally. The public inquiry into foreign interference focused on China, Russia, and Iran, along with other foreign state or non-state actors that had a particular interest in Alberta. We all know the importance of voter ID in elections, especially in light of the recent electoral results in the United States, where the majority of the states that went Democrat had more lax requirements on voting ID. Yeah, I'm curious. Let me know in the comments if you think that played a role in the US election. So now hopping into a story with a bit more of a national context, that being that rents have decreased nationally for the first time in over 3 years. This decrease was driven by new rental supply and slower population growth. So the 1.2% annual decrease brings average asking rents for all residential property types in Canada to $2,152 a month. Average rents for houses or townhouses decreased by 5.3%, followed by condos, which saw a 3.8% decrease, and apartments, which saw a 1.7% increase. Rent decreases were most notable in Canada's most expensive provinces, like Ontario and British Columbia, which saw 6% and 3% decreases respectively. Conversely, Canada's least expensive provinces saw rent increases, led by Saskatchewan with a 17% rise. As Canada's third least expensive province, trailing only Saskatchewan and Manitoba, you might imagine that Alberta saw an increase in rents, and this would be correct. The average rent for all types of apartment and condo rentals in Alberta increased by 6%, which averaged $1,786 per month. However, interestingly, 6 of the 10 most affordable small and mid-sized cities for average apartment rents in the country were in Alberta. They were Lloydminster, Fort McMurray, Grand Prairie, Medicine Hat. In fact, Lloydminster was the cheapest of all the listed Canadian markets. However, as you can imagine, it also saw the biggest rent increase of 24.3%. This has been a trend that has continued in Canada, where the most expensive markets are getting cheaper and the opposite is happening to the cheapest markets. Associate Director of Communications for Rentals.ca, Giacomo Lattis, told me that this is largely attributable to interprovincial migration from Canadians who are seeking affordable living. They're just moving out of the most expensive provinces to find cheaper living elsewhere. Let me know how you feel about this trend. Lattis said he expects the rent softening to continue over the winter, but expects demand and costs to skyrocket next spring. Now getting into a quick sports update here, and admittedly, I've actually been watching less and less hockey these days because I usually find myself focusing on my work or on my love life, and unfortunately the latter is kind of like the Leafs in the first round of the playoffs, an epic failure. On the flip side of the coin, Edmonton Oilers captain Connor McDavid became the 99th player to reach the 1,000-point mark. The 659 games it took him makes him the 4th fastest player to ever do so, surpassed only by Mike Bossy, who did it in 656, Mario Lemieux, who did it in 513, and of course, the great one, who did it in 424. So that wraps up our stories for the week, but we'll hop into the comment roundup here. The first comment comes from @BradenAmet343, who said, quote, "I hope we can get a press conference with Danielle Smith and Trump. That would be so cool if they announced the Keystone Project is back on together and both called out Trudeau at the same time." Yeah, so I decided to highlight this comment for various reasons. First and foremost, I see this as a likely possibility, especially considering the fact that Premier Smith has been aligning herself with Trump, most recently on Thursday when she announced she and Alberta would be the first non-US state to enter an energy pact with 12 other US states. She even tagged Donald Trump in her X post, and I could certainly see them at a press conference together in the near future. Also, we've already discussed that Trump plans to restart the Keystone Project, so I mean, there could be various reasons for the two to meet. The next comment comes from @JudithTaylor4799, who said, quote, Danielle Smith is the best. She really cares about Alberta and Canada. Yeah, so I decided to highlight this comment because, while I obviously agree that what you said is true, why does it seem like so many other leaders in Canada genuinely hate our country? From municipal to provincial to federal politicians, I mean, there seem to be way too many of them that genuinely hate Canada. Every policy they enact works against the country's well-being, and every word they utter puts the country to shame instead of lifting it up. I'm just curious, how is this allowed to be the case? Should our cities, provinces, and countries' leaders not be the most honorable and freedom-loving among us? Not the very opposite? So the last comment today that I'm going to feature is actually a pair of comments. Firstly, from that old white guy, sweet name by the way, who said, quote, this is Canada. One big silly cycle. Alberta always must pay for Eastern. It's always been the East against the West. Nothing new here, folks. Just new people looking. Yeah, so look, obviously I was too young to be alive during Pierre Trudeau's tenure, but a theme that I've seen popping up is that Justin is just like his father, an enemy of the West. My question is, how can and will the West ever become free of the East's control? Will the West ever stop bailing the East out through equalization payments and otherwise? I mean, I somehow find it doubtful. And the second comment that I wanted to attach to this was from @Nipples of Destiny, who explained the history of Canadian politics quite nicely when they said, quote, conservative, liberal. Oh no, conservative to clean up the liberals' mess. And the cycle repeats itself. Look, in studying history, this seems to always be the case, and I'm wondering whether anyone has any examples of it not being true. What was it that Albert Einstein said again? Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So I'd like to thank everyone for watching this episode of the Alberta Roundup. Please let me know if you have any ideas for additional segments of the show or other things that I could implement to make the show better. I'm always open to constructive criticism. I've always, since I took over the Alberta Roundup, really want to make this a show that I build together with you. Thank you and God bless. Have a great weekend.